Hello, ladies. Welcome back to A Feminine Touch God's Way. Abby and I are super stoked to talk to you guys this morning. Dating versus courting. What are the differences? How should women be interacting in this season of life? We'll get into all of that and I'm sure much more as we just dive into different concepts and thoughts about romance and romantic relationships. If you have not left us a review or a rating, please consider doing that if you enjoy this episode. But if you're like me and you're like, I'm not going to do that. I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to think about that. That's okay. We understand. Can I ask you to do something possibly even better? Would you consider sharing your favorite episode of this podcast or maybe this episode with a girlfriend of yours? Just share it with her. Hopefully it's encouraging to her. That is actually, as I've been researching how to spread podcasts, one of the biggest ways to get a podcast out there is just word of mouth. So you are one of the OG listeners, and we ask that you would bring in another sister in Christ to be encouraged and strengthened through our words. And with that, we're going to get started in the episode.
Hi,
and welcome to A Feminine Touch God's Way,
where I, Abbey Parrish, and my sister-in-law,
Jeshua Parrish,
discuss God's design for women in the family, the church, the community, the workplace, and so much more.
We are so excited for you to listen in on our stories and experiences as we turn to the Bible and seek God's will for our identity as His daughters,
so that together we can reap the blessings created within the biblical boundaries of womanhood. Good morning, Jay. All right, you said you had some opening remarks, so I guess I'm here to hear them.
Yeah, so I have, not going to lie, I've been a bit stressed about this episode, and I've been like, why am I so caught up in this? And other than it being kind of a big concept, tackling dating, courtship, all the highs and lows. One thing that I was thinking about is just genuinely, when you look at God's word, what is the woman's role in this process of finding a spouse? And what I'm finding is that role does not look like our culture's view of a romantic story. And so one thing about this podcast that was a huge motivation of why I wanted to do this and why I asked you to come alongside with this and to spend honestly a big part of our time is because I've noticed that our culture really blurs the line for the specific roles given to women. And I hadn't considered it before, but I think that the role that a woman plays in dating and in a courtship relationship is honestly blurred by our culture, so as a result, I think some of the things we have to say are going to be kind of unpopular.
I have no
what
doubt
do you think?
That what we're going to say is going to rub some people the wrong way, or at least cause them to stop and think, oh, why are they saying that? Why are they doing it that way instead of what I'm used to, what I've always done?
Yeah, so I guess I just, on the front end, want to ask our listeners to, if you feel yourself kind of oh, well, that's not how I did it and it worked out for me, or just getting rubbed the wrong way, or just oh, but that just sounds so boring or so unromantic, I would just ask you to pause and consider why you think that. Where is this image of romance coming from? Where is this image of a happily ever after story being derived? Because if it's from movies, and I'll be the first to say, even in my studying, I've been I don't know if that genuinely sounds very romantic. I don't know. And then I also have to sit there and be but if we serve a God who is the best storyteller of all time, who's writing and interweaving all of our stories into this grand story of this love and this pursuing that Christ had for his bride, surely his way is maybe not in our culture's view better, but in reality and in truth and in light and in all actuality, better. So I'm just asking you to suspend current beliefs, maybe be open to some different opinions and views and a different way to do things, and just think about it and chew on it. You don't have to make a decision anytime soon, but it is better to have more information in your arsenal when you're making a huge decision of who am I going to marry?
I totally agree with that. Also, you brought up a point that I appreciated. You said people will think that potentially whenever we're talking about the courtship side of things, that they might think of it as boring or dull. And if that's a thought that comes across your mind, I want to encourage you guys, just like Jeshua said, we serve a God who is the best storyteller. And in our finite minds, it's hard to comprehend that. But God is the one who is writing the story, not just of your life or your love life, but of all of history. And if you can look at all of history and go, wow, there are some crazy things that have happened. And if you can just look at the past of your family and see how things have been woven together for you just to get to where you are, then I think you can look at the past and see, wow, God has been faithful. You can look to the scriptures and see how God has been faithful. And you can look forward and say, and God will continue to be faithful. And it's not just an idea of faithfulness, but it's also just genuinely this idea of we are supposed to, and we are called to delight in the Lord. So if we are looking for a relationship to be what is our source of primary delight, then we are really making an idol of that relationship. So I'm not saying that that's what everybody's doing, but it's good to keep in mind of if you're thinking, man, I would honor the Lord in doing it this way. I would honor God in doing it the boring way, quote unquote. But because it's boring, I'd rather delight and have fun in this dating relationship, in this relationship that I have with someone of the opposite sex, just because I desire the enjoyment of it. Then that means you're not putting first things first. The first thing is, how can I honor God in my relationship? And then your enjoyment of it is still important, but it's not the primary thing. What do you got to say about that, Jay?
100%. I agree with what you said. I also wanted to add just a verse to kind of put things into context of, because I think it can be easy to just think, oh, well, we'll just let things happen. It'll happen as it happens. I'm just going to not think about this or be concerned with this. But there's a verse in Proverbs 19, and it says, house and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. And prudent meaning acting with or showing care and thought for the future. So if a spouse is something that you desire, then you should be seeking to be a prudent wife. You should be putting thought into, how will this process look? What role do I play? How, like Abby said, how can I honor the Lord? Furthermore, how can I honor my father? Because as we're going to get into, that is actually a huge deal in this process. Yeah. So I guess maybe if we could start, unless you had anything to tack onto that, just kind of defining a little bit of our terms, like what we mean when we say dating, how is that different or similar to courting, that sort of thing. Yeah, I'll go first. So I actually asked Gabe, I was like, would you say that we dated or we courted? And it was an interesting question because he was like, I'd say we courted. And I was like, really? Because I wouldn't. I would say we dated. And then it was like, in that conversation, it was like, these terms are really vague. Like when somebody says them, they could mean a totally different thing. So I kind of defined my terms a little bit. And he was like, after that, I would say probably more dating. Because dating, I think, is such an umbrella term. Like it covers almost everything. Like when you say I'm dating somebody, you could be saying we've gone on some dates. You could be saying we're courting, because like I think courting is a way of dating, but it's not necessarily, if you say you're dating, you think that they're courting. Dating could be we're dating online, like dating, like it's just like it covers such a wide range. Sure. So for this conversation specifically, while I don't think the term dating is a bad one, I think that when you are talking with other people about the status of your relationship, it's just kind of important to know what you mean by that. And understand that when you communicate to somebody, we're dating, that leaves the other person up to a lot of guesses as to what you mean by that. Like you're not being very clear. You're being kind of ambiguous, which again, could be a good tool in a specific conversation. But so that's kind of how I define dating. It's just like you're exclusively with another person in some romantic way. One caveat though, something I see in our culture, and I don't know that I would classify this as dating. I'm curious to see what you think, Abby. There's this like weird limbo phase where it's like, we're talking. I hate that so much. Like, it is just like, it drives me crazy because when you are quote unquote talking with somebody, it's like, we're not committed to each other. We could be talking to other people, but like they give me the feels. And so I get their attention right now. Like that's how I kind of, that's what I think of when they say we're talking. And what it really shows is a lack of commitment on the man's part. Like if he's just talking with you, especially over a long period of time, I would say he's not doing a very good job pursuing you. And he's not valuing the woman as she should be valued.
No, I think
what do you
really
think about that?
Definition of the we're talking phenomenon. It is kind of just saying, yeah, I'm not committed to this person, but I have some sort of feelings for them that are special. That is not what I would give the average other person of the opposite sex. And yeah, I think that it does show that the man is not taking it seriously. And then I also think that it shows that he's trying to kind of figure out how much the girl likes him before he kind of really dives in. And I also think that it shows that the girl doesn't have enough like a wherewithal, I guess, within her own surroundings to see that this is not something that is best. So it shows immaturity on both the guy and the girl's part. I do think that there's a certain extent of where there has to be some sort of transition from not, let's say you don't know someone very well to you start dating them. But I think that the way that it's done, by and large, is done very poorly. I think that transition can be done in friend group settings. I think that transition can be done because the man's supposed to be the pursuer. I think it can be done without the girl knowing as much as early on. I think there's a lot of ways that the guy can kind of figure out things about the girl that he says he's trying to figure out when they're talking. Like, oh, would I even enjoy this girl's company? Do I even think she's funny? Do I even think she would like me? Do I even think it would work out? And I think there's things that the guy can do that would protect the girl's heart by kind of not keeping her in the loop. I think when they're talking, they're trying to figure out the big question of, does she like me enough for me to keep going forward? And really, that's part of the guy's job is to potentially be turned down. Like, you know, he's supposed to be the one who takes the risks predominantly, not the girl.
I totally agree. And I think that kind of taps into something like this thought that I've been having, like, what is the role women play in this? And I've like come to the conclusion it is both extremely active and extremely passive all at the same time. Like passive in the sense as like you're going to talk more about of like, okay, these are the boundaries God has put in my life through his word and hopefully through my father. And that's where his blessings reside. So I'm going to passively lean into that and not resist that. But super active in the sense of like you were describing this situation where the guy's like, I don't know, like, does she like me? Does she not? Like the woman who is, and really she's that allows her to stay in this state of limbo for a really long time of we're talking. She is devaluing herself because she's allowing this man to have access to her emotions and access to her thoughts and intimacy, a lot of times intimacy and like sometimes even worse than that with phones. And she should be very active in saying, no, you don't have that right. Or do you think I am like so little of value that you can just walk into my life and demand all these things or charm me in this way? Like, no, I need some commitment on this side. Like, this is the kind of guy I'm looking for. You're not fitting the bill, you know?
I mean, it sounds harsh, but really it's just a way of guarding your heart. And obviously, if you're a girl listening to this, you don't need to be snooty. Like if a guy comes to you and says, hey, can I have your number? You don't need to be like, heck no.
Sure, yeah.
But you could say, you could just shrug your shoulders, be like, actually, I'd rather you get it from I'd rather you get it from my dad. Or it just really depends on the situation. Like I have the numbers of guys that I'm just friends with, but I'm not talking to them constantly, you know, like I have their numbers for other reasons. They're typically people I go to church with, and it's typically because I need it for church functions so that I can partner with them as we kind of get stuff off the ground. But it's not like I'm talking to them freely. So just the idea of you can do it in a way that is polite. You don't need to be the one who responds and eggs the guy on. I've also heard of a lot of girls, they'll do something where they're just like, yeah, I don't know what to say. So I have to talk to him so he doesn't feel like I'm being rude. You know what I'm talking about, Jay?
Yeah, just like feeling this responsibility of maintaining the emotions of the other person.
I think that, first of all, you should evaluate yourself. Are you actually still continuing a texting conversation late at night because you don't want to be rude to that person? Or is it because you genuinely like the way that you feel when they're texting you? And then also just this idea of sometimes it's okay to do things that appear rude. I don't think rudeness should be your goal, but being able to just go, if someone's texting you and it's late at night, being able to say, okay, good night, going to bed. Or, hey, it's after 8 p.m. and I'm going to spend time with my family now. Like, just be curt, be someone who is willing to put on the brakes if you see that things are progressing in a way that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, breaks are a huge tool and asset to women, I think, through this process. And they should not be afraid to hit them whenever they want to, for whatever reason, because you're not one flesh with this person. You really don't owe them much, especially if you're not even actually dating, if you're talking.
Actually, one more thing to... Oh, sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
Well, no, I was going to kind of switch gears. So
with regards to
I'll say my thing.
The talking phenomenon, I also think we just live in a culture where guys really just don't know what to do a lot of the time. So it's also very possible that you could have a top-notch, godly young dude who is desirous of genuinely pursuing you, but doesn't know how to go into, okay, how can I go from just being friends with this person to actually dating them? And the way the culture presents it is you do just start talking with them and you do become more exclusive with that person, but not so exclusive that you'd say it's officially dating. And I can think of an example of a friend that I have who's a young girl. Well, not young girl, but she's a young woman. And there was a young man who wanted to pursue her, and he reached out to her and texted her and basically said, hey, can we hang out one-on-one? And she said no to him over that text message and then didn't continue a text conversation with him for that day. But the next time that they were together, she basically brought it up to him and said, hey, I noticed that you said you wanted to spend time with me one-on-one. My family doesn't do that. If you're interested in getting to know me for romantic reasons, you have to talk to my dad about that. And if you're not and you just want to be friends, then I'm totally cool with that, but we'd need to do it in groups. And that really helps the young man. He was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that's how your family worked. I'm going to talk to your dad. And it helped this girl, who I was so happy when she told me this story, guard her heart. And it also helped put her dad in the involvement process from the get-go. And it gave the young man wisdom and guidance of how to proceed and move forward. And it put him talking to the dad too. So it wasn't just so the girl and the dad could be kind of on the same page. It was also so the young man was stepping up and kind of doing what he needed to be doing too. But he didn't know. And so he didn't have malicious intentions, but he was pushed by this girl who's now his girlfriend to basically be better than he otherwise would have been. And it resulted in what was a better thing than it would have been.
And that was a really great example of a woman honoring her father too. And if this young man loves the Lord and is looking for a godly wife, like her portraying to him, like, I honor my authority. Like I submit to that and I respect that and I trust God's design in that. That should be really attractive to a young man who wants a wife that will honor him, because that's the space that she learns to do that. So that's a really cool story that you gave. I wanted to mention one more kind of caveat before we kind of really get into the meat of our conversation. And this will probably end up being a 2-part episode, if not maybe 3, so our listeners are aware.
So buckle in, guys. It's just getting started.
And that, and again, ask us questions on our pages if you want them answered in these conversations. So there you go. But one other caveat that I just want to address. Obviously, God's word does not specifically say the words dating or courting. So a lot of this conversation is us looking at God's principles and seeing what pleases the Lord, how he's designed the family unit, what is the purpose of marriage, what are these, like, how can we protect our hearts in worship to God, not in worship of man. So we acknowledge that, but as a result of that being the reality, the way that you play out these principles might look vastly different from family to family. So if your father is nothing like Todd Parrish, do not freak out. That's okay. Like, but there is, to a greater or lesser extent, a role that he plays in this relationship. And that role, if it's very hands-off, we're going to talk about how you can still go about setting in protection and boundaries for yourself. But I just wanted to say that because I don't want anybody to walk away thinking, well, my dating relationship is doomed because I have nothing like that in place. Mm-hmm. It's okay. There's still ways that you can be wise and prudent throughout this process. There are still ways that you can honor your father, even though he doesn't even know that he desires to be honored in this conversation. So we're going to get into that. I just don't want you to be stressed about that or write this off because that doesn't fit our description. We know that the world doesn't work in ideals. And also, like, Abby's family isn't the ideal. God's word is. So they're just trying to figure it out just as much as my dad was tried to figure it out, just as much as Gabe and I will try to figure out for our children. And that's the best you can do, and pray for God's grace to fill the gaps.
Preach. So will you kind of talk a little bit about what dating is? And then I can kind of talk a little bit about the negative photo of that, what courtship is. Like if you're the positive photo and I'm the negative photo, or the opposite of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I kind of defined that term a little bit, but I would love to just paint a scenario maybe for you that I think what often happens is young girls get a desire to be in a relationship before they're even eligible for marriage. So they're already burning with this desire long before, and they're just like not groveling, but oftentimes they might be the one pursuing the man, and that might be directly, like it might be like, hey, you want to go out? That happens all the time. It might also be in the sense of the way she dresses and the way she twirls her hair and the way she's like batting her eyes, and she's just trying to get this man's attention because let's be honest, sometimes if like the low hanging fruit is there, a man is more likely to like, oh, okay, like you just fell into my lap. And I've even heard like, I wouldn't say grown men because I think that's kind of might be a little bit kinder than what they were at the time, but very much like, oh, men like it when women like make it easy for us. Like we appreciate that. And I'm like,
yeah,
what?
I've heard that before too.
What do you mean? You know? And so it's just like the dating game has turned into this, how desirable can I make myself as a woman? Not desirable in the way God's word says a wife is desirable, but desirable in the wedding day picturesque kind of desirable, not in the marriage lifelong honoring and joyful eligibility of marriage. So maybe they start this relationship, it's exclusive. They're both in it for the way the other person makes them feel. So it's largely like a taking relationship. Both people are taking. And that's why a lot of romantic relationships burn out, because it was all take. Nobody was trying to give honor to anybody or give respect. It was just like, you make me feel this way. You make me look this way. And I know I'm doing broad strokes here, but I think a lot of our listeners have seen this, can relate to this. You said in an earlier episode, you don't like rom-coms. I struggle with that because I do, but I am seeing the older I get, I'm like, oh, this is making me feel a little bit discontent in my marriage. Maybe I shouldn't be watching this. So I think the Lord's actively convicting me on that.
Sweet. Praise the Lord.
Because
I never have to watch another
portrayed,
one with you again.
Yeah. I don't know that. So they're probably bad for you. All of them. I have nothing like to say.
Yeah, rom-coms get me, man. I just get so frustrated.
They make you feel a certain way. I
genuinely think the average rom-com, and I might have said this in the last episode, but I think it's like emotional pornography. I think and that's I know sounds strong, and I'm not saying all of them are to that far of an extent, but I think they just teach women to feed on and want something that is not something that they have right now. And I think pornography does a similar thing for men.
It definitely builds an appetite in women that they try to fulfill in a world that doesn't support that kind of reality, because it's not reality. It's a false,
it's just not real
reality.
So, but anyways, as you were saying.
So yeah, that's the backdrop. That's the backdrop we're working in. That's what people, when they think of romance, they're like, where's the butterflies? Where's like, who do I think is cute? And
Yeah, and I think
very superficial.
I would coin that as recreational dating, like a recreational dating culture where people kind of, they date for fun, they date around, they're exclusive for a while, then they're done with that person and they go to another person. And really what that does is that trains people for divorce. Because if you have this pattern, your whole dating life of you date around, you date somebody for a month, a year, 2 years, and then you get to a point where you tire of the relationship, or things get hard, or you just realize you're incompatible, or you just realize that there are things that you had unreconcilable differences. If you're doing that as a person who dates and you do it again and again and again, that pattern gets ingrained into you. And without the grace of God, there's not a reason to think that pattern would stop just because you're now married. I think people, whenever they're dating, they still make similar promises. I will love you forever. This is different than all the other relationships I've been in. Or you're the only one for me. Like, people say that. They make those promises before marriage, and they will break off relationships. And I think people make those promises in marriages, and they also still break off relationships. So people, whenever they think, whenever I can date around from person to person to person, and I can kind of be a serial dater, it's not going to impact my relationships long term. It's not going to impact my marriage, because I'm dating to find a person to marry. But once I marry that person, those old relationships will be forgotten. And that's not really the case. I think that those things still impact you. And I think that just the pattern itself is ingrained into you, which is kind of the idea of, when things get hard or once I get bored, I cut and run. And that's what this recreational dating culture produces. And I think that's why we have so many people in the church as well as outside of the church that have high divorce rates. Like, there are, and I should have looked up the stats recently before we started this episode, but it is not low. I'm pretty sure it's 50%, but I need to be fact checked on that. Because the information I'm working off of is from 3 years ago. But it's just not something that produces a healthy marriage culture whenever you have a recreational dating culture. But just the idea of, when you have recreational dating, there's also, with the marriage statistics aside, there is a higher opportunity for sexual sin, because you're allowing yourself to get close emotionally with these people. You're allowing yourself to get close physically with these people. You're allowing yourself to get close relationally. And oftentimes in the recreational dating culture, that's done without a protective influence in your life. So it's girl meets boy, and the girl and boy exclude themselves from the other people around them who would protect them and want what is best for them. And this can happen in the world at large, and this can happen in the church. So like I said, I have these statistics. 47% of people between the ages of 15 and 17 years old have had sex. And then if you bump it up between the ages of 17 and 19, 75% of those individuals have had sex outside of marriage. And this is not in the world at large. These are statistics that revolve around specifically the evangelical church. So that's being able to look at the average person in your church and go, wow, the average evangelical, up to 75% of them, by the time that they're 20, have had a sexual relationship outside of marriage. So not only does marriage not set you up well, not only does recreational dating not set you up well just because it puts you in a pattern of cutting ties whenever things for some reason become displeasing to you, but it also sets up your marriage poorly because you've been physically intimate with someone who's not your spouse, and there's baggage left over from that. And obviously, the grace of God covers these things. You can sin in this way, be forgiven by the Lord, and then in the Lord's eyes on your wedding day, be viewed as someone who is spotless and clean. If you've repented of these sins and you've gone before the Lord and said, God, I am sorry, and I recognize what I did was wrong. And that sin won't be held against you, but there's still consequences for it, just as if, like you can't, there's natural consequences.
There's natural
It's not like the Lord's lording it over you. It's more along the lines of, this is just the natural progression. And unless God, for some reason or for some miraculous or in some miraculous way, takes that from you, those consequences are still there because of the fallen world that we live in.
Yeah. It is so crazy to think about how just those statistics you brought up, and it just blows my mind. Like, which is why we're having this conversation.
It's crazy that you can have a professing believer who is of just the Christian faith in general. And I didn't look up the statistics for other denominations within the church, but if it's high with evangelicals, I know it's high with other denominations as well. And I know that, well, I mean, like it could be high within just other Christians too, even if they don't claim to be evangelical. And then also within that, 50% of evangelical Christians say that having sex outside of marriage is okay. So you have 75% of people who over by the age of 20 are probably have had sex at least once. And of that 75% of them, a large portion of them think that there's nothing wrong with it. So I think that also shows that there's just an issue of there's not enough teaching in this realm. There's not enough educating to the youth, to the young adults, to the adults, that it's coming from the pulpit to say, yeah, your sin is a big deal, and the things you do in private impact your life in the long term, and you can't do what you want with your own body. You can't do what you want with your own thoughts and ideas. You have to have them submitted first to the lordship of Christ, and then secondly, if you're a woman, to your father, and then once you're married, to your husband. But there are things that I think dads abdicate their role in, and because of the abdication, the mass abdication of fathers, there are men and women who are kind of just floating throughout life in a listless way, not knowing what to do and what not to do. So everyone does what is right in their own eyes, and wickedness just freely flaunts itself. And I think that we see that self just in the sexual culture that we live in right now. And that's just one facet of a bigger problem. That's just one symptom of a bigger issue, which is dads not taking their role seriously. And I think pastors not really stepping up and being frank and honest with their congregations and preaching messages that people want to hear as opposed to what they need to hear.
I want to tack on to that too, because I think, yes, it is a message for the youth, but I think largely it's a message that needs to be taught and heard to the fathers. And I acknowledge that a big reason why there's this break in the information is because there's sometimes a lack of fathers. Like, I get that. But I think there's a lack of understanding, and this is a podcast for women, but that's another reason this episode's so tricky. I'm like, this is almost like a message that needs to be heard by men. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think a lot of dads don't understand that it is your responsibility to protect the purity of your daughter. It is your job to vet the young man that could potentially become one flesh with them. You don't get to say, all right, honey, you're 18. Yeah. Good luck. Because even if you choose to do that, okay, you choose to do that, you do, quote unquote, abdicate your role, whether you think you are or you're not, you are still responsible for what happens. That doesn't just stop because you wiped your hands and said, good luck, kid. Like, no, it is still your responsibility. It is something you should be actively praying for, that the Lord would provide this spouse. And that's another aspect to this whole thing that I think parents have a responsibility if you're a young parent. This is something Gabe and I think about even now, and our kid is like nowhere near marrying anybody. But the relationship parents have with other parents who are also raising kids could be the their future spouse. Like you could be cultivating a lifelong relationship, and you could have a direct role in the way your friends are interacting and parenting their kids by having good and hard conversations. Fellowship is such a necessary part of this process that I think is often like we think, oh, this boy is just going to fall out of the universe and he's going to be the one. But like, actually, God designed fellowship in such a way, like the family unit can't sustain itself. It needs other people. So you need to be interacting with other family units. And even to an extent, the church body needs to be interacting with other church bodies. And it might be solely for the point of, are their youth totally marrying? I mean, that's a good perk. But like the way God's designed his church and community by and large, we need to be interacting with each other. We need to be encouraging one another toward righteousness. And a very real fruit of that is that our kids have eligible spouses that love the Lord because you've been a part of the training of those children as well. So,
that was great. I totally agree with those things. Also, just hearkening back really quickly to what you said about the dad's responsibility. I think that ignorance to what the Word of God has to say or ignorance to doctrine doesn't mitigate a person's or a father's responsibility. So if you come to the end of your life and you're before the Lord and he goes, yeah, you were responsible for X, Y, Z and you failed in those areas. And if the husband were to go or if the father were to go, well, I just didn't know. That's not going to be an acceptable response because it is your job to know, father. It is your job to know, husband. So you can't just say, I didn't know. It's your responsibility to be in the know. If anybody knows in your home, it should be you. So to have the excuse of, I just didn't, then get to the point now where you will always be searching out more knowledge. Don't be stagnant. Don't think that you know all that there is to know. Understand that you don't. I'm saying this humbly because I know I don't understand or know everything that I need to either. But basically what I'm getting at is look at your life and go, okay, I feel like I'm doing well in these things, but what else do I still need to know? And then continue to learn. Continue to be a student of the word first, and then a student of the things that God has given you. So your family and how to lead them, because you will be responsible. And regardless, even if you're doing 99% of it with excellence, there's still that 1% you can improve on. And it's your job to continue reforming and improving and to know and to lead. And lack of knowledge does not
100%
mitigate responsibility.
Yeah. And like we're largely talking about the role that knowledge and that responsibility, that impact on your daughter, but it also has an impact on your son. Like the more you pursue knowledge, the more you pursue responsibility, the more you pursue righteousness and goodness, that spurs your sons on to be better men and to be more equipped and prepared to pursue and lead a young woman.
So it's not just for the benefit of your daughters.
It's all connected.
Your wife and your sons. Your sons are seeing you do it. Your daughters are seeing you do it. Your sons are seeing who to emulate. Your daughters are seeing who to be attracted to. Your wife is just blown away in awe by your amazingness.
Yeah. And it's like the Psalms say, like the sons go and marry. They go and marry because they've been shown how it is to go out and do that. And the daughters are given in marriage. They're protected. They are valued. They are brought up. And then they're like, all right, young man.
Yeah.
Here she is.
For sure. To the young man that went.
Yeah. So what are some other, I think we've kind of painted that picture of dating. I'd like to at least kind of start in maybe, we don't have a lot of time, but like go into the backbone of courtship. Maybe what are some of those big differences?
Yeah. I think.
Or we could cap it about here and just start the next episode with that too.
Things. Actually, Jay, instead of jumping into the courtship convo, because I think that we are getting close to running out of time, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about how in dating culture, sometimes people will flirt. I think that's kind of one of the things that's kind of also endemic of recreational dating. So I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and then I could give some of my own.
Yeah. So like flirting
do you
as
think
the
it's
sense,
okay?
is it okay?
Do you think it's okay to flirt? Do you think that it's appropriate? Is it something that whenever you see it, you're like, oh, that's adorable? Or does it make you throw up a little bit in your mouth? Like, how would you define flirting? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I would say I don't think there's a hard and fast rule personally.
Mm-hmm.
I think flirting can be a way in which a young man is trying to pursue a woman. So, I mean, the question is, are they ready for marriage? Like, is like dating even a good idea? I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but I do think it's important to know why. And why are you doing this? Are you aware of the feelings you're trying to elicit in the other person? Are you trying to pursue marriage as that end goal? But also, as I was prepping for this episode, I was trying to find a fun like line to start off the episode. And what
like a pickup line?
I wasn't trying to find a pickup line. I was trying to find like a classic quote from a movie or something. But what I could only find were trashy pickup lines. And I say trashy because it was like the woman was trying to pick up the guy. I mean, even like a visual picture. Like, yeah. So it's like, it was just really weird. And I just find that to be, again, like you're making yourself low hanging fruit. I don't think that's a very feminine quality. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I would agree.
I'd like to turn the question back on you.
I think most of the time, whenever I see people who are flirting, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I think if you're already dating or if you're married, I think that it's appropriate and you should be flirty with that person. But I think that whenever you're in the in-between stage, which is whenever I see a lot of the flirting taking place, I really don't think it's appropriate. I think that it's a form of kind of trying to shop when you're not ready to buy. And I think that if you were to go into a store without money and then you walk out without having bought anything, you'll either have wasted your time, the people that work at the store's time, or you'll be frustrated because you saw stuff you wanted and then you had to leave. And I think whenever you're flirting, you're engaging in riling up your emotions. And I think that's why girls like it so much, is because of the way it makes them feel. And I think that's why guys do it, is because they know that they'll get responses from girls. And I think for the most part, especially whenever you're young and you don't have the ability to be married, flirting is a bad idea. And especially if you're my age or older and you're flirting with people that you're not actually in a relationship with, I just think that doesn't set you up well. Like, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to flirt around with the guys at my church and to be known as a flirt. I wouldn't want that as my reputation. And I would encourage godly young women to not want that as their reputation either. It says in the Proverbs that the woman folly is loud. And I think flirtation is somewhat loud, even though it doesn't necessarily mean loud in volume. It speaks volumes of your character as well as of what you are willing to do and not do. And I would steer people away from being flirtatious, especially, I know I'm speaking to women, I'd steer away from women to be flirtatious, because that's whenever I think women sometimes will be flirty either intentionally or unintentionally. And unintentionally is also an issue. And it causes the young men around them to like them and have feelings for them because they think the girl likes them, when really the girl is just being flirty because it makes her feel good, or the girl's being unintentionally flirty because it's her personality. And I think that it doesn't really set people up for success in that moment, as well as for later on with getting to know and stay in relationship with that person.
Yeah, it is interesting. I feel like guys aren't really trained or know how to pursue a woman very well, but boys sure know how to flirt. You know, there's a difference.
Yeah, and we've all seen it.
Yeah.
And some guys don't too. And like, there's a certain level of, it's not like across the board, but it is something like guys are just designed to be the pursuers and women are designed to be the initiators. And both people like it. It's something that's enjoyable, flirting, but it doesn't mean that it's something that you should do if you're not in the right situation for it to be appropriate.
Yeah. Do not start love before
like I've seen
time.
You and Gabe. Yeah, it should be within the timing of the Lord. And it even says that in Song of Solomon, don't awaken love before it's time. And I think that's what flirtation does. And I like whenever you and Gabe flirt, or whenever my parents flirt with one another, I think it's cute or I think it's endearing. But if I see people who aren't even dating flirting with one another, I think that it has the potential to be unwise. So that's kind of where I stand with that. And I would just encourage people to check themselves if you do find yourself as someone who's more flirty, and ask yourself, okay, am I doing this either absent-mindedly, which could be an issue, or am I doing this because I like the way it feels? And if you're flirtatious because you just enjoy the momentary pleasures of how that person made you feel in that moment, then you're really settling. You're settling for something so much less.
Yeah. I think with that, we're out of time. We'll have to pick up this conversation in the next episode and get more into the courting side of this coin. Sweet. Ladies, do not grow weary of doing good.
Because we know in God's timing that we will reap a good harvest if we do not give up.
Bye-bye.
Bye.